We'll go ahead and get started. Some people will still be coming in. The escalators, as you might imagine, are a little packed because everything went just about 14:25. I'm Buck Hernan from the Institute of Land Warfare, one of the senior fellows. I'm here to introduce the panel. As you might have heard from the Chief's comments there, the topic, of course, is aligning forces for the combatant commanders. The importance of that, of course, was discussed very briefly in the Chief's comments there at lunch when he talked about the importance of regional familiarity, cultural awareness, developing relationships. You know, in the old days, we had the Forces 4 document that aligned forces. Of course, for the last 10 years, with the high op-tempo, purge tempo, we haven't had the regional alignments that we enjoyed in the Forces 4 document some years ago. But of course that is being re-looked. Unquestionably, for both training exercises and developing professional relationships with our allies and coalition partners, having those regional alignments, those regional relationships is extremely important. And that's the topic of today's discussions. A couple of administrative announcements. There's some forms that have been passed out. The Chief of Staff's office, through the Office of the Public Affairs people, have asked for you to fill out some questionnaires. The importance of that, of course, is the Chief's office would like feedback as to what we can do to improve the panels, the information flow through the AUSA symposiums, so we get a better understanding and feel on how we can improve things here for future conferences. When you have your questions, if you could please go to the microphones in the center so that everybody can hear the question. And most importantly, if you have a specific person here on the panel you'd like to address that question to identify that individual. I'd like to turn it over at this time to Lieutenant General John Campbell, who is the Army G3. John?
Sure, thanks very much. Well, first off, welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking time to be in this panel. We know you have a lot of choices out there. But we look forward to this. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple things up front. If I don't get Q&A, I'm going to ask you guys questions, all right? And I know a lot of you out there, and so I will direct those to you. Now, I ran a panel yesterday, and it was more about the versatile Army and where we're going for 2020. And the first two questions I got were on regionally aligned forces. And so I said, hey, come back tomorrow. So I don't know if you're here, but we'll try to get at that. The other piece of this is, you know, sort of the ROE. This is a discussion, right? We're not going to sit up here and lecture you. Got a couple slides, but we really want to have a discussion with you and talk about regionally aligned forces. If you just came from the Eisenhower lunch, the Chief talked about that and where we're going into the future with our Army and regionally aligned forces. Don't read that as BCTs, but the total Army, active, guard, and reserve. And it may not be a BCT, but may be as small as a squad all the way up. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail on that. That's regionally aligned forces, so in total. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But the ROE is a little bit different than if you were in the panel I had yesterday. Yesterday, I let everybody kind of go down the line, and we spent the first hour just talking, and some of you over there started nodding, right? So you came to ask us questions. If you got a question and somebody's talking, go ahead, raise your hand, move to the mic, as General Kernan said, and ask the question, all right? And you can direct it at any one of us. And we'll pass them among ourselves as well. I will try to facilitate and make sure that every panel member gets to say a couple things up here because they did some preparation to do this. And that'll add to and give you an opportunity to ask questions. But I don't want to wait and go a full hour or 45 minutes and hear everybody talk and you guys just sit there. So if you got a question, please raise your hand. I'll get you to move to the mic and we'll go from there. All right? If you're in the G357 and you're over here, you're wrong. You should be back there rowing in the Pentagon. All right? Scott, sit down. Yeah, I hear you. Tom, what are you doing? Who's running OD right now? Both of you guys are here? All right. To make up for that, take a look at that. It's not really a critique sheet, but the thing, General Kernan, it says very well on the right-hand column. Just check those off right now, and you'll be fine. So those are your two choices. Well, really, let me recognize who else is on the panel here and tell you a little bit about them and I think what they're going to talk about. Frank Wachinski here is a Commanding General of the United States Army Pacific, a great friend, classmate from West Point. And so I will direct all my questions to Frank as we get going. But he is going to talk about what regionally aligned forces will mean to the Pacific, how that ties in with the defense strategy, and really the term rebalance toward the Pacific as opposed to pivot, because our Army, about 60,000 strong, is in the Pacific, has been in the Pacific, and with Frank's great leadership is doing some incredibly wonderful things in a lot of different countries that we've never been there. In fact, he may not tell you, but Thursday night he came in on the red eye from Burma, and he's been the first senior military guy in Burma in many, many years. And if you ask him a question on that, I'm sure he'd talk about it. So,
Or not.
Or not. And he's going to talk a little bit about regional line forces and how that'll tie into what the USAPAC Commander Admiral Locklear wants to go to. Next is Pat Donahue. He's a commanding general for U.S. Army Africa. And as you may or may not know, we're going to line the first BCT to Africa. And so Pat will talk a little bit about how he is going to use that. If you were at the congressional breakfast this morning, the chief talked about 93 different mission sets that Pat already has lined up for that regionally aligned force. Now, we say the first regionally aligned force because that's really a pilot that we're starting to try to get some lessons learned and see where we go in the future. But really, if you think about it, we have 9 BCTs plus already regionally aligned in CENTCOM, if you think about what's in Afghanistan. All right? So you need to broaden your aperture a little bit, and the forces that are already working for those combatant commanders are aligned. And so everything in Afghanistan is aligned to CENTCOM. Now, Pat will tell you he doesn't have any assigned forces, and we're going to work through that. But as you know, Africa, a very growing mission set there, and Pat will talk a little bit about that. Jeff Bailey will be the next speaker. Jeff is the G357 at FORCECOM, and he'll talk a little bit about training and how we train and how you look at the R4Gen, the progressive readiness model, to get forces ready to go from a FORCECOM perspective, and how he'll tie that into combatant commanders and their demand. Next, Tim Cadavy from the National Guard will talk about how regionally aligned forces aligns with what the National Guard is going to do in the future. May talk a little bit about state partnership. If not, I'd encourage you to ask him some questions on that. And he'll talk about the great relationship between the active and the Guard and what they've been doing and how they will tie in and already tie in to the regionally aligned concept. And I skipped, nope, and Lieutenant General retired Dave Barno will talk a little bit about, well, hopefully he will critically examine what we've all been talking about and may throw some questions back at us as we ask him. But many years in the Army, now with one of the think tanks here in town, but we welcome, sir, your participation on this panel as well, and thanks for doing that. Some will show slides, some won't. And again, I'm going to try to strategically set us up here, and I have 2 slides to show up front, and then get us going, and then I'll pass it off to the other panel members. So if I can have the first slide there. I'll give you a chance to read that. I think this is, if you take nothing away from this discussion, again, not a lecture, but a discussion, and if you heard the chief at lunch, this is the Army vision. This is where Secretary McHugh and General Odierno want to take the Army. And I'm not going to go through and reread that. You can see that. But regionally, responsive, the chief talked about that, globally engaged. He talked about applying the Army and meeting some of those demands of the combatant commanders. And if you're a combatant commander outside of CENTCOM for the last 10 or 11 years, we may not have been able to provide you everything that you wanted. Now, as we've come out of Iraq, as we'll come down slowly out of Afghanistan, we have an opportunity to apply those resources to get at some of the things in theater security engagement to help prevent and shape, so maybe we don't have to do in Afghanistan or we don't have to do in Iraq down the future. Some of the things that we're working and that we're going to implement or have already implemented. And we're going to start aligning those forces, and we've aligned 2nd Brigade, 1st Infantry, again, as I talked about to Pat, and U.S. Army Africa. We're going to align headquarters with combatant commanders. We will align 1st Corps with PACOM. We will align 3 Corps with CENTCOM, and the 18th Airborne Corps will be the global, as part of really a GRF type of force, to be able to respond to the other combatant commanders. Those combatant commanders that don't have a corps aligned to them will have a division aligned to them, and we'll set that division up prior to understand those missions and tailor that division for that particular combatant command. We hope that by doing this and by rotating forces, it'll help strengthen the alliances that we have and the partnerships that we have. And the chief talked a little bit about the NATO response force, if you heard him in there. As we have come down and continue to come out of Europe, have gone from 4 brigade combat teams down to 3 now, and the next summer we'll come down to 2. A requirement for us is really to have a NATO response force, a brigade that can deploy over there and provide some of those things that the brigades that were there before will continue to do, to train, to help work with and understand what our NATO and allies need. He also talked a little bit this morning about JMTC and the training that's going on with 19 different nations at Grafenwehr today. Sort of like JRTC just completed a decisive action rotation, but with 19 of our allies and countries there. We're going to also adapt the force generation model, and Jeff will talk a little bit about this and make sure that the process really focuses on providing ready and responsive forces. And again, that's always been focused at the BCT, and I want to take you off the BCT and think about all Army forces from squad all the way up. And those, for lack of a better term, I'll just call responsive or rapid response packages that we'll continue to work through. And another thing we're working that will help us with regionally aligned forces is to take a hard look and examine where we are on our APS and our pre-positioned stock. We're going to have to make some changes there on where they're located. We'll have to adjust training sets probably in the Pacific, potentially Australia, maybe some other places that Frank has looked at. We've had some teams on the ground to do that. We'll probably have to put some training sets in Germany as we rotate forces there. But as we come back and we're more CONA-centered, you will see us try to put out those APS or those training sets forward positions. So those are some of the things that we continue to work. Again, the intent is to make sure that these regionally aligned forces are both for operational missions as well as security cooperation. Now, there's some challenges that we got to work through, and some of that we will learn from what Pat will do with his regionally aligned force. There's some funding issues that we got to get at. There's some authorities that we got to get at. We've identified many of those already. Last Thursday, Chief of Staff brought in all the ASCC, the component commanders, the Army commanders from all the combatant commands, brought them in along with the Corps commanders, and we spent the entire day in that very small group talking about regionally aligned forces and the emerging challenges that we're going to have as we move forward. And funding and authorities were two issues that we don't have all the answers. We're going to continue to work through that piece of it, but all of those commanders brought that up, so we'll work through that. But the Chief's intent is to make sure that regionally aligned forces are flexible and that combatant commanders can tap into that resource. He talked, and you heard him use the words tailorable, scalable, and those are the type of forces that we're taking a hard look at. So again, you may have heard regionally aligned brigade as we started this a year or so ago. We moved to regionally aligned forces, but the intent is to encompass all of the total Army, both the active guard and the reserve. All right, everybody have a chance to read through the Army Vision? I'm going to ask some questions. Who's ready for the first question? Army Vision, we're going to have a quiz here. Yeah, I see you pointing a finger there. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to do this at the same time as you can see those bullets and some of the challenges, but we're going to remain engaged and do this as we go from an Army, an active Army, of about 570 to 490. And the good thing is right now the Army has worked that very hard. Secretary McHugh and the Chief have worked that so that the Army is able to dictate that ramp as we draw down, and that's very, very important. And we can set the personnel policies out there so that we can bring that Army based on where the Chief and the Secretary think we need to be to ensure that we can continue to accomplish those missions as we move forward. So that timeline on there is now to FY17 as we bring that down to 490. About 80,000 out of the active, about 8,000 out of the Guard but no structure, and about 1,000 out of the Reserve but no structure. We're trying to maintain that. So another thing that we'll look at and learn from regionally aligned forces is what's that mix? And if you were at the congressional breakfast this morning, the Chief talked about armored. We've moved away from HBCT, and the term is Armored Brigade Combat Team. There's a medium package there with strikers, the IBCTs, and then the airborne. And so that mix, we got to really work hard as we continue to move that piece of it. But really, I think success is going to be determined by deploying the right soldier that's got the right training, the right size, at the right time for that combatant commander. So that's what we're going to work hard at trying to do. Chief also talked about understanding and how complicated the world is. I showed a slide yesterday that talked about our complex world. All right? And I said something like, you know, this is a world that we live in. It may be the world that we don't want to live in, but let's get on with it. It's the world we live in. It showed a whole bunch of cloudbursts. They were all over the world and all the different things going on. And no borders. and a few men with some weapons and a cell phone and the difference that they could make, when years ago it took months and months of preparation. But that dynamic has changed. And it probably was much easier for our Army when we had a monolithic threat that we only had to focus on. But we don't have that now. So that map with all those bubbles is really the world we live in, unfortunately. But your Army has to be ready. And so as we rebalance in the Pacific, we still have to make sure that we can regionally align and take a look at the entire globe, because that's what your nation will ask of our Army. And so we'll continue to work that pretty hard. But regionally aligned forces will help us with understanding the social and the cultural networks that are out there, and we'll continue to rotate that, and we think our soldiers will continue to get better and better. Can I have the second slide, please? This really shows the Army through 2020 and beyond, and it says beyond because 2020 is really, it's not an end point, right? We got to continue to work through that. That's sort of a waypoint for us as we look at the force to the future. And again, the intent, you can see on the left-hand side, the current forces that we have now, really based on Iraq and Afghanistan and where we went to modularity. And modularity at that time was a good thing. We're taking a hard look at modularity and whether or not we got it exactly right, and what we have to do to our brigades as we regionally align, and what we have to do to those other enablers as we regionally align. So in the middle there you see regionally aligned force, and as you continue to move to the right, and again, if you were at the lunch, you heard the chief say this, mission-tailored, regionally aligned forces, and we think that is where the Army needs to get to. It'll cover the gamut. On the bottom it talks about COIN, it talks about other missions out there, it talks about scalable from squad on up. So again, regionally aligned forces, not just the BCTs. Regionally aligned forces will be tied in with our special operating forces, and we're looking very hard at something called SOF 4 Gen, all right, Special Operating Forces Generation, tailored after our 4 Gen, so that we can align our enablers and conventional forces with our special operating forces prior to deployment, getting them trained. They worked that before, and then they deploy. But we'll talk that a little bit, I think, when Jeff talks about the future force generation model and really progressive readiness as we move forward there. I'll have a couple comments, I think, to talk about at the end, but really what I wanted to kind of set the stage for the other presenters up here is regional aligned forces is really about getting, again, the right force at the right time for that combatant commander. And for the last 10 or 11 years, if you were the CENTCOM commander, you were getting what you needed. Other places in the world, because your Army was engaged where it was engaged, we just couldn't provide many of the things to get at both operational missions and the theater security engagement that our combatant commanders needed out there. And if we could do that, and we can continue to shape, then maybe we can prevent something like Iraq or Afghanistan because we have our forces regionally aligned. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pass it to my great friend Frank, unless there's any upfront questions for me. But again, if you have questions as we move through this, raise your hand. We'll get you over to Mike, and we'll continue to go. Otherwise, these guys will just keep going in succession here. So I'm going to challenge you to challenge us. All right? Frank.
Thanks, JC. Great to be with you all again this afternoon. I'm not going to cover a lot because we had our ILW panel this morning. I see a lot of the same faces in the room, and we talked a lot about the rebalance, the shift, the pivot, the refocus to the Pacific, and what that all entails. But there are a couple of things that I think would be helpful to dive into just for a few moments. And I think it's important to talk pre-9/11 first, because a lot of folks in this room remember that, and remember how we were organized, what we had, the op plans that were out there, how we were aligned prior to 9/11, and where our focus was, and where we were able to train, and what we were able to do with our allies, partners, and friends. 9/11. And since 9/11, U.S. Army Pacific has deployed over 170,000 soldiers into the fight. Rightfully so, as that was the priority and where we should have been going. And training, prepping, going to the fight, coming back, refit, reset, prepping, going back into the fight. Well, that was great for CENTCOM, and it was great for the nation because we had to do it. But the PACOM commander lost his Army. Bottom line, PACOM commander has a quiver, just like any good archer, and knows what he needs to pull, when he needs to pull it for any type of mission across the entire spectrum And he did not have that with his Army. Now, we told him, if you had something, we'll be there. But you, as a commander and as a COCOM, you cannot count on that. Well, after time, start getting written out of this plan, start getting written out of that plan, start not exercising in this country because you don't have the force available, and it's just like a muscle, it atrophies. And people forget what that Army can do. It's not what we're getting, and I must answer this question. Ever since the President came out with the rebalance, I must have answered this question 100 times. Everybody wants to ask, what are you getting? What are you getting? What are you getting? It's what we're getting back, and that's good enough. And quite frankly, on the ground today, with the 25th Infantry Division back home and focused on the Pacific, with 1st Corps now aligned in the Pacific and focused on the Pacific, it is back. And with 8th Army and 2nd ID now falling under USAR PAC for all Title 10, single ASCC in the Pacific, we are organized, tasked organized, set, and ready to go for the PACOM commander. But as I said, there has been an atrophy over 11 years, and it's going to take us a lot of work to work that back into the thought process, the muscle movement. Now, the good thing is Admiral Locklear, the PACOM commander, is eyes wide open, ears wide open, and really thinking out of the box and thinking back into the days. Could I have my first slide, please? Here's what we've been told to do, and this comes from a myriad of different documents, statements, directives, either by the COCOM commander or by our chief, directly to me. And the first one, and I'm not going to hit all of them, you can read them, but a theater JFLIC, an Army, an ASCC, that component, unlike all the other components, has Title 10 responsibilities that far exceed just our service. Our responsibilities to the Air Force, our responsibilities to the Navy, to the Marine Corps, transcend a lot of different mission sets. So our ASCC and our theater has to be prepared to act as a JFLIC for a theater to synchronize, organize, coordinate, and provide those Title 10 functions which could be required by any service. That capability has to reside within my headquarters as the ASCC. The 3-star operational JTF has just changed to 2 3-star operational JTFs. 8th Army, which was an ASCC about a year ago, is now an operational JTF on the Korean Peninsula. We have assumed, as the service component, we have assumed those responsibilities that 8th Army once had, now freeing up J.D. Johnson as a 3-star operational command on the ground. The other 3-star requirement is now back, and that is the core requirement. And that we have been on a steady process of education and work to ensure that the COCOM understands the huge capability he has with a force structure like that core, which is coming right off a combat tour and is, quite frankly, one of the most certified headquarters we have out there. There's also a 2-star requirement of a headquarters, and now having the 25th Infantry Division back in Hawaii, it can also function in that role. So can some of our other theater-enabling commands, the things J.C. was talking about, that aren't BCT aligned. We have theater-enabling commands within the ASCC, like the 8th Theater Sustainment Command, 311th Signal Command, Pacific Engineer Division, 18th MedCom. These organizations transcend all services and operate across our AOR. The first thing you know when you come to the Pacific is it's a big place. 16 time zones, about 9,000 miles across. We call it Hollywood to Bollywood. And it takes time to get anywhere when you're in the Pacific. It is just a huge place to operate. These theater enabling commands are capable of providing theater-level support across the joint force for the COCOM commander. He does not have anybody else except the Army that can do that. The Joint Pacific Multinational Regional Capability, JPMRC. Okay, now we have our forces back, and we have learned how to train over the years in a CTC-like structure where our forces are prepared to go anywhere across the entire spectrum after they have completed a CTC rotation. And just like the JMRC in Europe now, the OCMRC, and Fort Polk, Fort Irwin, we believe having a joint multinational CTC-like exportable capability will not only increase our opportunities to train more effectively and more efficiently, but also our multinational partners. Now, this is not meant to replace a CTC rotation, but it reduces our time factors of having to constantly go to a CTC to train. When I was a Deputy Commanding General of the 25th Infantry Division about 1,000 years ago, it cost us about $14 million to get to a CTC from Hawaii or Alaska. Today, it's upwards of about $28 million. And that's just to get there and back. Having an exportable type of capability like a JMRTC really now gives us efficiency and the opportunity to train not only multinationally, as I said, but also jointly. One of the unique things about the Pacific, we are joint. The PACOM commander is the only COCOM commander that has all of his component commanders in one location, and all of his force structure very tightly controlled. So we operate on a daily basis, normally and nominally, in a joint environment. And of course, you can see the BCT demand there on a daily basis just from what we have been told to do. And none of this includes exercises, engagement, subject matter expert, what have you. Next slide, please. So what are we looking at? And it's really not that confusing, but how would we, a concept of regionally aligned, because not only we're so big, the AOR is so big, not only do we have brigades and functions and units that Headquarters DA is aligning to the Pacific, because of the width, breadth, and depth of the AOR, we are also realigning those units within the AOR. It's no surprise to anybody that the main focus is the Korean Peninsula. It's where our threat is every day. And we wake up every morning with the threat right across the DMZ, prepared to fight tonight. So when you see the main arrow of First Corps focused to Northeast Asia, it will remain the focus of First Corps towards Northeast Asia. But now that it's back, we can also move that to Southeast Asia, to Oceania, to our other treaty allies. And they're in the Pacific. 5 of our 7 treaty allies from the United States of America are in the Pacific. Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Thailand, Australia. We have signed paper that we will support and defend. And we cannot lose the fact of that and have to be aligned towards those. But there are other things we can do. Alaska, for instance, and the brigades that are associated there align with places like Mongolia and Nepal, northern India. Perfectly suited for that environment and for that terrain, and they have an automatic relationship that transcends a whole lot of other pieces. And then you could see the legend, if you will, of all of the other theater enabling commands, all of the other command and control headquarters that we can utilize to really cover this massive AOR. I would also highlight in the bottom left there the State Partnership Program. A lot of people really do not understand it. And I'll give you an example. My first meeting in Bangladesh, I walked into the Chief of Army, and the first thing he told me was, "Don't you love my guys from Oregon?" Oregon? What guys do you have from Oregon? He said, "My National Guard from Oregon." They feel so strongly about their state partnership programs and what happens in there that they actually have a relationship that is strong and has been built, and particularly over the last 11 years, they do great work, really superb work. As a matter of fact, we've just signed a state partnership program with Vietnam. And it is amazing to see how much of an enabler that program is, and I know that you guys are going to cover that here very shortly. The bottom line is, the PACOM commander has his United States Army back in a quiver. And he knows that we can be the tailorable, scalable force that's in it for the long haul, because we are the only force that can sustain itself over time of any mission across any parts of the spectrum. With that, I'll stop talking right now and open for questions if you have any, or pass it on to Pat.
I got one redirect.
Okay.
You know, I told you I wouldn't take any more forces from you. I got to have a caveat on that. So,
Oh, man, see, already.
really, the PACOM commander has 5 Stryker brigades out of the 8 that we have. So as we look around globally, a requirement for Strykers, we may have to come in and reach in and say, Frank, I need to use these Strykers. But if we do that, what we are committed to doing is we take a brigade like that, we will give USARPAC another brigade and align a brigade with him. So that's the deal we have right now, to continue to make sure we rebalance, refocus in the Pacific. If we take a brigade, and probably Stryker would be the only we have to go based on only 5 of 8 available there. So we'll work with that. Questions for Frank at all as we move forward? All right, everybody stand up for a second. All right, go ahead, stand up. All right, if you work in the Pentagon, sit down. All right, if you're from another country, sit down. If you're from the media, sit down. Okay, somebody out of this group has a question. We're not going to go to the next panelist till we get a question. I got to keep you thinking here.
I have a question or a thought. Based on the regional alignment of forces and
Why don't you move the microphone, because they're doing this webcast as well. Thank you. Everybody else sit down. He got you off the hook, but I'm going to come back at you guys again.
Based on what was just presented with regards to the state partnerships with the National Guard and what you spoke about, General Campbell, and the regionally aligned forces, is that going to be maintained or considered as we go to that regionally aligned forces to keep those Guard partnerships with those regional areas they're already aligned with?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll let Tim talk more about this, let him take the question. But where I think we go is we just refocus that a little bit, and we make sure that all the state partnership, anything that belongs in an operational environment, think term battle space, all right, belongs to the SCC commander. So if there's a state partnership going in USARPAC, then the CG here knows where they are. He helps set the priorities through the PACOM commander so that you don't have a particular state going to a particular country and saying, I'm going to go do this, and it's not aligned with what the combatant commander needs to have. So we absolutely want to keep the partnership and the state partnership. For the money that we spend there, the bang that we get is pretty incredible. And the relationships goes back years and years and years. But if you take a look at where most of those are, they're in Europe, all right? And we need to get those and align them with the Pacific. We got to take a hard look and prioritize the countries that we have. And there's probably some countries out there that we've been doing it for years, and we may not need to do it there. And we have to realign them and prioritize that to make sure we're in line with the defense strategy as we move forward. So bottom line, state partnerships is here to stay. We want to really focus it. And Tim, if you want to add anything on that.
Sir, I guess the thing I would add is just to say it's a joint program. It belongs to the Chief National Guard Bureau, and so there is an Air Guard part of that. But the reality is about 75 to 80% of the dollars that go into that program is Army dollars. And we recognize that anything that is associated with theater security cooperation or build partnership capacity is something that needs to be run through the Army Service Component Commander. And we haven't always been that good at that because of the way SPP started, which was a kind of a direct program between the commander UCOM and a previous chief of the National Guard Bureau. So what we're committed to is those type of things that are truly service component related and Army specific. Those have to go through and have approval and oversight of what goes on by the service component commander, the ASCC, in that theater of operation.
You know, Frank gave one example. Before we move on, let me just you know, emphasize state partnership again, because I was a recipient of a Polish task force in Afghanistan when I was the RC East commander from the 101st. And so Poland had a long-standing relationship with Illinois, and still does to this day. And that state partnership was a reason that that Polish task force was prepared to do the things they needed to do in Ghazni province. So members from that state partnership from the Illinois National Guard trained with the Polish task force, deployed over to Poland about 4 months early, then deployed with the brigade task force into Afghanistan, and then they stayed only 6-month rotations in. When they came out, they were resupplied again with another set of Illinois National Guardsmen working with the next Polish task force that came in. Very, very important. Didn't have that same thing with France when we had the great Task Force Lafayette in Capisa, and we added some enablers to help there, but they also did learn the value of that, and I think you'll see that continue to move as well. So state partnership, you really get a lot of bang for the buck there, and again, that'll continue to go. Okay, please.
Are we also looking at the personnel MTO?
Sorry, Major, I gotta have you run all the way to the mic, because again, they're webcasting this thing. And you got a double time. All right, too long, you can't ask your question.
Next.
Next.
That's really not that, probably not worth it. But so are we also looking at the MTO, not just for equipment, but also personnel? So, for instance, we don't, go to Iraq with a bunch of Korean MI guys and vice versa. So, looking at the low density, especially military intelligence soldiers, that the MTO is coded with the right language required for that region.
Yeah, no, good point. And I think, language is a whole other topic that we could probably spend an entire panel on. We're going to take a hard look at the prioritization of languages and which ones we need and how some units are MTO'd with a certain language. Right now, the way we're looking at regionally aligned forces, and this could change, but the way we're looking at regionally aligned, at least at the brigade level, maybe different for the division, certainly for the Corps, but at the brigade level, not necessarily a brigade will be aligned with Southcom, and the next time it comes up in its available pool, it'll go back to Southcom again. That's currently not how we're looking at it, right? We're going to learn some stuff here, again, as we put 2-1 into Africa, but now on the progressive readiness model, you could be a BCT, and again, we're saying BCT, but I want you to think in terms of squad all the way up, tailorable, scalable, and Pat, I think, will tell you, he's not going to take an entire BCT and put them over there. He's going to take engineers, he's going to take MPs, he's going to take doctors, all right, and put them in different places. But right now, the current plan, and again, to change based on what we learn, is a brigade goes through, reset, train and ready, it gets in the available phase, it's aligned to a particular combatant commander. It may not be the one that he's aligned to next time. There's pros and cons here, we got to work through it. It may be a con that you don't have that cultural and that language experience to continue to build up, sort of the model that our special forces have used as they orient their groups to different parts of the world. But I think that's something we'll go through and continue to work. All right, Pat.
Well, thank you. I think General Campbell's beginning some OJT work here for his post-Army job as a kindergarten teacher, but he's done a very good job. I am the commander of U.S. Army Africa, which is the Army Service Component for AFRICOM. And I'm also the commanding general of the Southern European Task Force, which is a NATO headquarters. I still have that mission as well. And finally, I'm the commander of 9th Army, which means I provide all the theater support that is required for operations in Africa. I do all that with 405 assigned personnel. So I've become very good at finding forces within the Army to execute my mission. And I'll talk about that on my next slide. I'd like to go, I think when AFRICOM stood up and my command, it's only a little over 2 years old, it stood up. It was focusing on assured access. And General Ham has redirected the focus of AFRICOM, and we've also adjusted our focus to focus on all 5 objectives for the continent, besides assured access. And that is defeating Al-Qaeda and terrorist threats, countering transnational threats, developing proficiency in the African countries to execute peacekeeping operations, and gaining support for human rights and support to democratically elected institutions. So we're doing all of that now. So we've expanded our focus of what we do, and this is why. On this slide here, this shows, you know, we had a little debate on what to call it, so we decided to call it insecurity, because not all of these are threats. Some of these are just, you know, what's happening on the continent. But everything, it ranges from arms smuggling into the Palestine area along the coast, the eastern coast. We see Guinea-Bissau on the western coast is a narco state. Significant drug issues pass through there. In the north, Libya brought that area, the volatility of that area to light in the last couple of months with Ansar al-Sharia in both Libya and Tunisia. And then one of the results of that, when the militias, the Tarq militias fled Libya, they moved into North Mali and basically defeated the Malian army that was there and took over a piece of ground that's bigger than the size of Texas, with the support of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. So that's a pretty significant ungoverned space with a fairly significant threat developing there. And that's right there in the eastern part, that large country there in the eastern part of my map there. Then you move to the western part. Move more to the east around the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We have all sorts of threats there. We have rebels, we have insurgents, we have just evil people like Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army operating in that area. And then of course we have Al-Shabaab operating out of Somalia. So it's a very interesting country filled with terrorists, insurgents, rebels, drug runners, and instability. And the little yellow country down in the southern part is Zimbabwe. They're having their elections in March, and they're predicted to be very exceptionally violent. So that's the traditional types of threats that we're looking at, or insecurity that we're looking at in the continent. So let me go to my next slide, and I'll show you what we're doing to help address that threat. I told you I had no assigned forces, and the Army has given me the 2-1 HBCT out of Fort Riley, Kansas, as my first regional aligned force. They're going through their decisive operations, decisive action training. They're going through an NTC rotation in March, and after that, I'll have them available for what I need them to do for theater security cooperation on the continent. All those gray countries are the countries that brigade will be in the first 6 months that they work for me. So, you know, like General Campbell said, sometimes it'll be like an MP platoon and some engineers trained in the Ugandan army and giving them a route clearance capability, you know, for a 6-month mission. Or it could be I have that headquarters working a lot of my exercises for me. They're going to do a tabletop exercise in Egypt for all the northern countries in August, called Northern Accord. And then they're going to do a big FTX in South Africa in July, called Shared Accord or Southern Accord. So I'm using them for the tradition, and I'm also using them for the traditional mill-to-mill type activities that we've been doing in Africa for the last 3 or 4 years. So they're going to be employed in the full range of type of activities we envision as part of security assistance. The growth, you show, the chart there on the top right corner shows the growth of the activities we're doing on the continent. And I want to highlight the top category, train and equip. That is more the security force assistance we've done in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we stay and we work with the host nation, the partner country, until they develop and field a capability. So instead of the 5-day, 2-week types of things we've been doing on the continent largely up to this point, those would be 6 months to a year type of engagements, so that at the end of it, the partner nation will have a fielded capability. So you see that growth there. I anticipate that's going to continue to grow as we get more missions as we go, as missions develop and given the situation, especially in the West, that's occurring. I want to also highlight in the bottom right-hand corner that the RAF is way more than that BCT. You know, the brigade from Fort Riley is that unit there all the way to the top left corner in that little chart. But I also have engineers from the 20th Engineers who provide me geointelligence support. I have an EOD detachment out of Fort Leonard Wood that is doing humanitarian mine action. They have 10 missions on the continent. I have a brand new Civil Affairs Battalion active duty that's allocated to me. 1 October was their IOC. They're about half strength right now. They'll be full up strength by the springtime. They're going to be all over the continent. I got a lot of missions for them to do. In addition to those are the active duty forces that are allocated to me, that will be allocated to me. I also have some unofficial alignments. One is I have the 141 MEB out of North Dakota, who I get to go to for exercises. That headquarters is going to provide the command and control for one of my big exercises in Cameroon. And that is an FTX that at the end of it will give 8 countries the capability to do parachute resupply and medevac, air medevac, using their indigenous assets. So a good mission to help them fight the Boko Haram in that particular country.
I wrote down unofficial here when you said that, so I'm going to ask you some questions afterwards.
Okay, and then another one of those unofficial ones is the 353 CA command out of the reserve components. Again, they're just available. They aggressively reach out to me, and when I have a mission or exercise or activity needs to be filled, both of those 2 brigades are volunteers frequently and get tasked to do the mission. I have also 8 state partners and do various levels of missions and activities. I have Nigeria has great access to the United States Army through the California Guard. And, you know, my predecessor couldn't even get to Nigeria, couldn't get his visa approved. I went there last week, but it is a hard place to get to, but not for the Guard. And they have a very good relationship with them through the State Partnership Program. And they do a significant amount of work through that program. Give you an idea, like Utah has a relationship with Morocco, and they're doing 15 events. Vermont has something with Senegal, a relationship with Senegal, and they're doing 7 activities. And you know, California has 18 planned activities. Most of them are mill-to-mill. They're short durations. They're exposing them to how our chaplains will operate or how we do logistics or things like that. So, but we're looking at, like I said, different types of operations in the future here that are more sustained. At the end of it, will yield a fielded capability for their host nation. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about is what I call regional line support. It's like all the support I get from TRADOC and from AMC. TRADOC is great. If I have like an intel college that's standing up in Tanzania, they will send instructors out there to help them. If that operation we're doing in Cameroon, the exercise we're doing in Cameroon, the Fort Benning Pathfinders are going to certify the instructors from the Guard. They're going to be doing that instruction. So, you know, I get support, a lot of unofficial support from TRADOC. You know, they just go TDY and they show up and get it done. Asymmetric Warfare Group is very good at doing that. Similarly, I get support from MedCom. I stumble onto things in my travel on the continent, like there's 2 infectious disease centers, one in Nigeria and one in Kenya. Been there for decades and doing great work, and I'm bringing them into the U.S. Army Africa team as I find them. So anyway, so it's not just the formal stuff like I mentioned, you know, like the stuff that's allocated. I have nothing assigned. I think General Campbell is going to help me get some assigned troops so I can give the COCOM commander a immediate response in a crisis. But I think I have what I need. I can make CONUS-based forces, they are a viable solution to doing theater security cooperation on the continent of Africa, given the process that we have and the relationships we're developing. Pending your questions, I'll pass it on to General
We're
Bailey.
not going to pass on till we get a question. That's my new rule. Sir.
Sir, Sean Munyon. I'm an old cavalryman, but I remember the days of cohort when we went to basic training, enlisted an officer. Went to basic training, went off with my whole basic training class. Half went to Germany, half went to Korea. And I have no illusions of grandeur in this or of joining up on the panel. But if regionally aligned forces is tied in with our personnel, so young lieutenants go to the basic course, BOLIC. They get the French training because they know that they're going to push that class off to a regionally aligned brigade, and also the corollary with families. So a young lieutenant and his wife, or a young soldier and his wife go off to Fort Hood. They stay there, they homestead. We don't PCS them so much. We have efficiencies in our expenditures, and that spouse is able to support their husband as they're going over to Africa more frequently, more often, because she's got longevity in her career, because they've homesteaded at Fort Hood for 15 years, and he becomes your SME, and he builds his relationships. When he is 06, 07, he is that, he's linked in with that country. So just a question for panel.
No, great point, and I think you just talked about many of the pros that would go with aligning a force and keeping them there and continue to rotate them. You know, what we've done in the past too many times, and both probably for non-commissioned officers and officers, you know, take an officer that goes through and majors in, you pick a country or you pick a language, and then we send them to halfway around the world someplace else. Doesn't make sense. So our personnel policies have to become aligned with our regionally aligned forces. We're working through some of those. We've identified some of those challenges out there, and I think over time we'll get at that. But you know, that's common sense stuff that sometime in the bureaucracy we have is hard to fix. But we're really trying to work that much closer to take those in. So
I think, sir, that maybe the final solution that we'll reach or stumble onto eventually would be some combination. For instance, that CA brigade, the CA battalion that's allocated, should develop real expertise in the region with the languages and culture, because that's their mission. Whereas, you know, a unit that rotates into Africa, there are 54 countries and each one's different. So it's what's probably more important is to have a proficiency in dealing with a foreign culture, understanding how to do that. And rather than becoming an expert in Nigeria, because you may become an expert in Nigeria and the problems in, you know, in the DRC. So I think it's more important that certain elements become the experts like you're talking about, real experts, and then we make the Army good and culturally fluent and being able to operate in someone else's culture, and which is really the future for the Army. That's what we do. We don't operate at home. We operate in someone else's culture abroad.
And, you know, the measure of success will be where the guy that backfills Pat doesn't have to stumble into those things. They're already in place. We've got to work that piece hard. But there's other opportunities out there that the Army's going to work, whether that's broadening assignments for our captains, majors to go do different things in other countries, whether that's educational type things they can do, whether it's just L&O type opportunities. You know, we have a very good program in the Army with many different countries that we bring officers over, and they're assigned to staffs down to battalion level in many cases, and for their 2 or 3 year assignment they're working hand in hand. They deploy for the most part if that unit deploys, and many of those things we have to continue to keep and maybe increase based on the defense strategy on how we work that. Our schools and who comes to the Command and General Staff College, who goes to the war colleges, that's a big deal. You know, an example for me, again, back in Afghanistan in RC East, had to make many trips across the border to Pakistan, and I had to deal with a guy by the name of Lieutenant General Asif, who was the 11th Corps commander. And before him, I don't know who the commander was, but the difference I saw between my predecessor and then the 11th Corps commander is the 11th Corps commander was a National Defense University graduate, 2006. So that came away right away. You had some credibility, and you were able to talk some things, get down to business. And a lot of times at the strategic level, when you talk about Pakistan, Afghanistan, that's a whole other panel as well. But when you get down to the tactical and operational level, you have those relationships, because regionally aligned forces, that's about relationships. And when you have those relationships, you can get things done. Please, Tom. What are you here for? Who's in the basement running the Army down there? Go ahead.
Gentlemen, this is a question for the ASCC commanders. Given that
You got to go to the mic. Sergeant Major, go to the mic. You got to go to the mic.
It's PT for today.
I'll let you start before.
why do the officers get to walk? I don't
Could you answer that, Tom?
Gentlemen, this is a question for the ASCC commanders. More specifically, given the suppressed demand that you've had for the COCOMs over the last 10 years because of the support being provided to CENTCOM, my question is, how do we register the demand so we can build that into our base budget as an Army, because clearly the COCOMs would not pay for that? And then more specifically, how do you start working with the COCOM commanders to build it into your TSC so in the out years, FY14, 15, we can have that registered demand built into our base budget?
Well, I'll start, and I'll take a stab at it, but that demand signal paper that you saw, that first slide that came up with me, that was developed through PACOM. And that came after a long time of education and saying, no, really, First Corps is coming back, I promise. And then you can build that type of demand signal, and they did it. The funding for this is going to have to follow, because, you know, we could talk about the whole quiver thing, but if you bring the quiver and you got the arrow and it's got no feathers, you got a problem. And, you know, vision is a beautiful thing, but vision without resources is illusion. And I can't go back to the PACOM commander with illusion.
Well, I think we're doing better with our TSC. We're actually going to include that in our POM submission, so that we will, rather than you guessing what we will demand from the Army in the POM, we'll give you our best guess based on what we think we'll be doing. I think where we need a little more work is developing what are the operational requirements, and generating comm plans with TIPFIDs, and coming up with CONOPS that get supported by the Joint Staff to allow us to get either assigned or allocated operational forces, not just the stuff we're doing, not just the units and the assets we're using for TSC. So I think, and I'm working with you, I'm working with AFRICOM, and I'm working with my own staff to develop solutions to help us get that operational demand identified.
Okay, Jeff?
Well, sir, thank you. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about training and how we ready the forces for the types of missions. If you take a look at the slide that General Donahue had up, all the countries in gray, where he's going to give them, each of those generally represent different missions. So it's a pretty daunting task to train and ready the Army for those type of demands, because they're going to vary by COCOM, by location, and by mission. But most of you know this, the Army executes that mission to man, train, and equip the force through a progressive readiness model. If you'd go to the next slide, please. Some of you may have seen parts of this model yesterday. General Garrett, the Deputy Commanding General for Forces Command, and General Campbell led a discussion on the 24-month R4 Gen model, or that forces generation model that we'll use. And so that remains the base of how we train forces that will be regionally aligned to support combatant commanders in the future. It's a progressive readiness model, and as you'll note at the top, there's 3 pools of forces. We reset forces and man them and equip them for specific missions there in that block that's to the far left. We train them and make them ready for the mission that they're going to accept as they become available to the combatant commanders in the middle. And then over to the right, that represents about a 12-month period where those forces will be available to the ASCC commanders here to my right. And I think what's encouraging to all of you who are trainers, to those of you who have deployed over the last few years, is that model hasn't changed that much. We will continue to train our Army just like we have over the past 10 years. And we're pretty confident that we can meet the requirements that they're going to lay on the table. So what you're going to see that will remain the same is that our top mission will be to train for decisive action missions doing combined arms security, or wide area security and combined arms maneuver. That will be the #1 mission against the core tasks that the Department of the Army has set for our units. So the things offense, defense, stability operation, mission command, sustainment, those remain the core tasks of the teams that will be deploying or that we're going to make ready and available. That will be progressively executed. They'll come out of the reset period about the squad level. They'll continue to train, develop proficiency at the platoon and company level, and then you see the culminating training event there in the red box. That's the combat training center rotations that we've always used to validate forces. And once we get them to that point, we are very confident that they can deploy anywhere in the world and conduct decisive action operations in support of any con plan. So that's what changes, or that's what stays the same as we move into 2020. That's what we've been doing, unless it was a force that was generated for coin-specific operations. What changes is how we develop specific skills for General Donahue. So what we would expect to see is to the left side of that starburst, number 1 there, is we would get guidance from the ASCC commander that describes the individual and the leader skills that we need to set as a foundation as we get into the reset period. So, Sergeant Major, your question about language. We should get some guidance from the ASC about the languages that they should start to master, about the cultural skills that they're going to need, geographic things to master, enemies, military formations. We should get that before they come into reset, and as you all know, that becomes the baseline for collective success later on. So if you think about, if you're designing a training scenario right as you come out of your reset period, you would just weave that into the fabric of your training event. Instead of training against the Krasnovians or some fictional force, we're going to depend on the ASCCs to explain to us what they want, how it should be developed, and we'll develop individual and leader skills early in the cycle. So they'll continue to work up through their company level proficiency, just as I described. And if you'll note in the middle of that chart, there's a yellow block, and that's where we work on regional proficiency. About 6 months prior to that, we'll ask the ASCCs again for some more guidance. What are the collective skills that you want these formations to master? And we'll start to weave that into our collective training. And as they come out of the CTC, we'll give them about 2 to 3 months where they focus exclusively on honing the collective training requirements that it takes to be successful when deployed. So, for example, we'll have trained the core metals. If we have a mission essential task that is designed or designated by the ASCC, say NEO, we would add that to the list, and the force would start training those collective things. So we think that by the time we get them through the first train and ready period there, we'll have a force that's able to deploy. And then for the rest of that year, if they're not employed by the ASCC, they do sustainment training to keep their skills sharp for decisive actions against their core tasks or whatever the ASCC has asked them to do. Then you'll note the institutional training in the blue line. That's maybe what we haven't done so well the last 10 years, investing in the NCOESs, our officer education systems, getting people to functional training like Ranger School. That will happen throughout the training cycle to make sure we have the sharp skills that we need for the force. Okay, slide. So the one thing that would stand out to you, to be able to train a force like that, probably not something the expertise doesn't reside within a combat formation. Think about a 4-brigade commander in 2-1 who's got to send somebody to 20 different countries. How does he gain that expertise? We've got to lean on the Army at large. And, you know, you could probably title this slide a training community of interest. And what General Rodriguez has in his mind, if you take a look on the left side of that, is to start to modify formations and services that allows us to push help to those brigade commanders. So I'll give you an example with the 162nd Infantry Brigade located there at Fort Polk. Right now, that's the formation that helps us train our security force assistance teams when they come through there. They're optimally designed to help folks as they get ready to go to Afghanistan. So what we'll do in the future is develop a battalion that will be tailored for each COCOM. So just say PACOM, for as an example. We'll put the right expertise in that battalion to help brigades as they become regionally aligned. They'll have language skills, cultural advisors, experts in the geography, the militaries, and that will be a push into the unit through mobile training teams that allows us to generate greater capability as they come out of the reset cycle. And then on the right side, it's important that you've got a big Army that stands behind these formations. So the green boxes, that's the regionally aligned forces. But what about the rest of the Army? Can they do anything to provide greater reach to the combatant commanders? And we think they can. As an example, INSCOM. 17 brigades, I think, if I have that right, 17 brigades in INSCOM with the greatest intelligence community in the world. The ability to provide the type of analytical skills to the RAFs we think is very important. And then, of course, once they're deployed, we'll have the systems and the architecture in our formations to reach back and get the help from those types of units. So it does take more than a brigade to develop a regional force. We think it takes the whole Army, and we're going to develop a training community of interest to help do that. Who will lead it? I don't know that that's decided yet. You could probably make an argument that the ASCC would be the head of that, because they would have the continuity to understand the areas, to understand the skills and the profiles. And if you have in your mind, if you've ever sat on the warfighting forums, like for the strikers, the infantry, and the armor communities, those are pretty good forums that generate a continuity of thought across the formation. And that may be something like that, but except for it's more expansive because it brings in the whole Army. So there's a lot we could talk about. I'd be glad to entertain any of your questions, but I think that's a thumbnail of how General Rodriguez would see us moving forward and adopting the platform by which we train.
Todd, think you had a question?
Yes, sir, I do.
And the Army senior trainer is in the back. General McCaffrey, be prepared.
That's right. Sir, Colonel Keith, sir, I'm your war planner, and be careful what you ask for because you might end up getting tasked to do it.
Yep.
There's a tension that exists between the two gentlemen in the middle and FORSCOM and the Army G3 sort of on the ends. I hear I-Corps is mine, finally. 25th is mine, finally. I hear I'm going to have forces, assigned to Africa eventually, it's coming. And then I got this ARFORGEN model. And I mean, I can understand both arguments, but I think the thing that I'm sort of wrestling with in my mind is that where does it make sense? I mean, where's the break point where that's a lot of work right there to prepare one brigade for, a variety of missions, a lot of work, a lot of money. Not that that's bad. And it's probably very, very good that we build those skills in our force to have that cross-cultural capability. But if we can't get that same brigade back to that area, is that a problem? And if it is, has ARFORGEN reached its logical conclusion? And we go all in and we say, okay, this many brigades to PACOM, this many to SOUTHCOM, this many to, And again, sorry, it's not, this is a dialogue, and it's not a, attempt to put the Army's position in question, but it does bring it up to a point where it should be discussed, I think. And so that's my question for the panel,
No, great
especially
question.
the floor.
All right, you're going to stay at about 2,300 tonight when you get back to the Pentagon, as opposed to 2,200. Now, that is a great question. And again, I think as we move forward with 2-1, we're going to learn some of those lessons and maybe move and have to adjust as we go forward. And I said up front, 2020 is not an endpoint. It's a kind of a waypoint. We are an Army in transition, all right? And what that really means is we got to work this out. And this defense strategy is defense strategy over time. It ain't happening today, all right? We got to work through that piece of it. So you bring up some very good points. But, it's not only one BCT that's going to get looked at. So out of all the BCTs, both on the Guard and the active side, there'll be several that are in the train ready, several in the available phase. So there'll be more than one, and we'll have to apply those resources as we go through that. Again, we haven't made that decision on whether you keep that same brigade and you go through and you go back to the same combatant commander or we adjust that. What we have done, we think, is based on, for at least the active, on a potential 24-month model for R4Gen, that we're going to leave soldiers in that particular BCT for 2 rotations. All right, and we think that'll provide some stability. That'll provide them maybe 2 opportunities deployed to a certain combatant command. So we think that'll help out. We may have to take a look at BCT structure and say, these guys in these critical positions, they're not going to change up. They're going to do something like home-based stationing that somebody brought up here earlier. So I think those are things that we'll look at and we'll optimize as we move forward. So, modularity was a good thing. It came when we needed it. There's a lot of reasons why we went to it, but I told you up front we may not have gotten it right, and it's going to tie in how we move our force to the future and figure out what we do need in a BCT, what we don't. And again, regional aligned forces is not just about the BCT, but those are good questions. I don't have a final answer for you. I think we're going to continue to work. We're going to be very dependent at HQDA on our ASCC Corps commanders. The chief is going to be very, very transparent and is taking feedback from his commanders out in the field. He's engaging with the combatant commanders. He's tasked both General Cohn from TRADOC and General Rodriguez from Forces Command to reach out to the combatant commanders, make sure they understand both from a training perspective and then from an R4Gen perspective what that means to them, and then get their feedback on how we can adjust it as we go forward. So I mean, I don't have an answer, other than I think we're, it's a challenge we'll work through and we'll get at it. But I'll turn over to anybody else here that wants to.
So just one thought from the other thing that we do in FORSCOM is run this R4 Gen process, and I spent a fair amount of time thinking about this. And one of the things I would offer to the collective body is that we are marred in our vision of the R4 Gen cycle because of the last 5 years. If you could look at the demand in the future, what I think you'll see is a lot more brigade combat teams home. Right now, we have greater demand on brigade combat teams than we've had in the last 4 or 5 years. It's actually gone up, and that's not intuitive. But if you can put yourself in a place where we're not as decisively engaged in Afghanistan as we are today, a lot of the formations actually could be aligned if that's the way the chief wanted to go. So there's one line you'd have to discuss whether or not you really want to align, because there's also something to be said for an edge that can be sharpened to fight in any theater. But we could do it. So, for example, corps, you could probably, if you wanted to, align corps. There are fires brigades that could probably be aligned if you wanted to out into the future. And if you go on through the eaches of our formations, I think when you get out past 15, we start to see some stability that would allow us to do it. And I would just conclude by saying, even if you did what you're describing as a good thing, there wouldn't be enough to go to every COCOM anyways. So you're always going to have to rotate in order to meet emergent requirements as they come up to the Army to fall in on. So I think it's more feasible than what meets the bottom line, just because we're scarred by what we've been dealing with the last couple of years, which is meeting supply and demand is a hard one to manage.
Now, what Jeff said, hopefully everybody got there, that the op tempo has really increased here lately, and a big reason for that is going to 9-month deployments, right? So as you go to a 9-month deployment, although you come back earlier, it takes 2 to get 1. So in the short term, and we knew that going in, that by reducing from a 12 to a 9-month deployment, that the op tempo and the number of BCTs and other forces that would be required, particularly in Afghanistan, would, at least through 12, 13, and potentially in 14, would continue to increase.
And I would tell you that, there is no cookie-cutter solution on this thing. Every ASCC is different. I don't have the same issues as Pat does. We have assigned forces. They are there. They're there all the time. They live in the AOR. Will they rotate out on an R4 Gen? Certainly. And we will have another regionally aligned brigade. But let's not make this harder than it already is. And it's not that difficult. We understand what we have to do when someone comes out of theater, reset, refit, and you get back into the groove, just like the 25th is right now, and First Corps. But we have to be cautious about applying a cookie-cutter solution when you're talking about all of these ASCCs, because they are extremely different in width and breadth, and John knows this better than anybody.
Way back in the back.
If I could just quickly, while you're walking up there, sir, I would think also, don't forget to look at a total force solution, because I think the 30th HBCT ran an exercise for me in Botswana, because North Carolina is regionally aligned to Botswana, and they have a relationship with that country, and they were a really good fit because they knew everybody from all the military leadership of Botswana, and they did a great job running the exercise. Similarly, the MEB from North Dakota, their state is aligned to Ghana. And so they want to be involved in Africa because of that alignment. So that's why they volunteered to be available. So there may be some of this expertise, this real sustained expertise, will be in the Guard and the Reserve rather than the active component.
Yeah, and I just add briefly that one of the purposes of the reserve component is to ensure the Army has capacity. And while we don't deploy at the rate that the active component does, it doesn't mean that within that 5-year force generation model that there isn't availability for smaller type exercises. Right. So that if the AC doesn't have it available because of deployments, don't hesitate to ask. Just ask early enough so the unit can prepare and be ready, realizing how reserve component soldiers train.
Sir, good afternoon. Colonel J.T. Thompson from the Chief Strategic Studies Group. In a regionally aligned force environment, what do you view, or who do you view as the battle space owner? Is it SOLF or is it the BCT, given that SOLF has historically been in these areas for many years, but yet historically make poor battle space owners most of the time? And also a follow-up to that was, do you see any need or foresee any need to revisit the wording or the requirements of Title 10 and Title 22 in the more contested areas, such as North Africa and the Mali area, in case flashpoints happen?
I think you're asking us to do your homework for you from your
Yes, sir.
strategic studies.
You know, first off, I guess we're calling battle space operational environment now. So in the operational environment, the answer I'm going to give you is it depends, right? And it depends on who actually has mission command of that operational environment. It may be underneath SOF, it may be under the conventional force. I think the integration that we have between that community is the best it's ever been, and I think we worked that out prior to going into whatever country that they would go in. So I don't really see that as an issue. And I think the guys on the conventional side will tell you they've worked for SOF guys, and the guys on the SOF side, they will tell you they've worked for the conventional guys. So that's something I think is easy to work through. The key will be to make sure that we can do all the training and stuff ahead of time to make sure that wherever they deploy, that they've had that, and they're not meeting up on the battlefield at nighttime when the decisions you have to make are much more difficult, and so you can make that ahead of time. So I think we'll get through there. On the Title 22 piece, I think we got to continue to work that. The issue we have now on security force assistance is, you know, if you're a combatant commander, you want to be able to do that over time and figure out your plan and do it on and on and on. But if you're in the State Department or something, you can only look at it maybe based on capacity and what you're looking at and priorities from the government a shorter amount of time, and you may not get the effect you want. So we're all about increasing that and working security force assistance over time, but we have to work through some of those things. And I told you up front that authorities is one of the areas that, you know, we don't have all the answers to yet.
John, a comment on that if I could.
Yes, sir.
One person we haven't heard mentioned this afternoon who may be the most important battle space owner is the Chief of Mission, the U.S. Ambassador. We're sending troops into 34 countries in Africa here. There's 34 chiefs of missions who have 34 very different opinions about whether that's a good idea or not, or how military forces interact with their embassy. And I think that this program, which has tremendous merit and is just the right thing for the Army to be doing, is going to have to spend a lot of time working that side of the equation. Yep. I was at a conference about 2 years ago in Aspen, and I surfaced the idea that as the Army comes back from these wars, it's going to have a lot of capacity to do just exactly what we've been hearing today. And in a room full of foreign service people and folks of that background, had quite the fight on my hands. I barely got out of the room alive. So there's a whole dimension of this that has to do with who actually owns those countries in the U.S. government and who American forces are going to have to report to and coordinate with. And that's got to be taken with very careful kid gloves, in my opinion.
Now, Dave, I think you're exactly right. And the first person we see when we go into a country is the ambassador and get the first country team. That's step one for all of us. But you are exactly right. They're all different. And just like the ASCCs are different, every country within our AOR is different. And it's going to require no cookie-cutter solutions to any of this stuff.
But I think the good thing, you know, based on the last 10 years, and I told this story yesterday as well, not only do we have the most combat-tested Army that we've ever had, both from the young private all the way to the general, but on our State Department, all of our NGOs, USAID, we have men and women who have volunteered to go in harm's way over and over and over again. And the relationships that they have with the Army now is pretty incredible, and relationships makes a difference. So I told the story yesterday of Don Library, who was a senior civilian for General Scap in Afghanistan. Then as I came in, stayed with me a little bit. She was promoted Friday at a ceremony at State Department. She's now the ambassador to Burundi. And she mentioned in her remarks the great relationship that she had with the Army and what that meant as she moves forward. So I think those things will really work out and help us down the road because of those relationships and what we've seen over the last several years. But great point there.
Just as a footnote, maybe explain what the ASCCs do. All these missions I briefed have been approved. They were generated by cooperating with the country team, and they support each of the country plans for those ambassadors. And what we're going to do a little bit differently, though, sir, is engage with the country teams and help with the quality of the things that they generate. They may not be aware of the capabilities U.S. Army has to meet some of their objectives within the country, and so we're going to work for them up front so that what comes out of the country team is probably suits their needs better. And that's something we, like, there's one poor major in Nigeria is trying to do it for all of the OSC for that country, and it's way too much for him, so we got to help him, and we're doing that from my headquarters.
Okay. Tim, Tim, I know you're going to talk state partnership, but one of the other things that not a lot of people know or understand is also the capacity that you have with lieutenant colonels, colonels that are in those countries full-time. They're doing different things, different from state partnership. I think ties into what, if you can talk a little bit about that. And I forget the name of it, but there's both Air Force and Army out of the 65, 68 state partnerships you have.
The BAO program?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, sir. Well, good afternoon. I'm Tim Cadby. I'm the Deputy Director for the Army National Guard. Let me first start by saying that the Army National Guard is committed to being a full partner and a complete partner with the Army in the regionally aligned forces strategy. We think we can be value added to the whole proposition, and we're extremely happy to join the Army in this effort and be part of the Army. So three things that I think just off the top of my head that we can help with is, first, the civilians get a set of skills that our soldiers come from or come with. My experience, having observed several of the exercises and exchanges, a lot of it moves to what else can you do to help me in my country. I've got this problem too, and sometimes a reserve component soldier will come with an additional set of skills, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's schools, teaching, whether it's business, whether it's financial, etc., that can help build relationships and maybe get your foot a little bit further in the door. Just briefly about SPP, I think our experience with SPP is something the Army needs to leverage, and I'll give you two things that I personally think. One is that it's extremely helpful in ensuring continuity within relationships, because many of the adjutant generals who currently work with state partner programs started 20 years ago, and so many of their counterparts, the Minister of Defenses or the Chief of Defense Forces, they were majors together, and they did exercises and exchanges together, and then they were lieutenant colonels and et cetera. And so there's this relationship and trust that's built over time. So I think that helps with continuity as maybe battalions and brigades move through the RAF or ASCC commanders move through. And so the next thing is that I think if an ASCC commander elects to, I think they can utilize, particularly a new commander, can utilize the state partnership program to accelerate or jumpstart their relationships with some of the countries because of the thing I talked about before, and maybe get past some of the initial relationship building and start from a higher level of trust. Generally, how we work within the Army National Guard, and I would say the Army Reserve as well, as we fill exercises, as we fill mission assignments, as we also work with exchanges, is a system called RTIMS, which is the Army Training Information System. I know there's this perspective from time to time that you go visit a country and suddenly one of the ASCC commanders bumps into a guardsman that's there and says, how did you get there and what are you doing? Well, RTIMS is the system that is used. It comes out of AR 350-9, and as I said, it's the system by which ASCCs request exercise support, mission support, engagements that they can't meet with their currently assigned forces. Now, I think what Pat will tell you, he and I have talked a couple times on the phone, is RTIMS needs to be given some more capability so it says exactly the type of capacity you want and the capability you want. Because what we don't want to do is provide a force that maybe isn't ready or isn't prepared for what the expectation is for the ASCC commander. But we're committed to making it better, and we're committed to making sure the force shows up to do exactly what the ASCC commander has for an expectation. So some of the things that we do that we think we can do with regional line forces in addition to just aligning some forces, is state partnership program, and I'll go through that here in a minute. We've already been participating at great length in joint exercise programs and ASCC exercises. One of them, General Donahue mentioned a little bit earlier, Southern Accord this summer. And then we have some additional programs called the Reciprocal Small Unit Exchange Program and the Reserve Officer NCO Foreign Exchange Program. And then one of the things I wasn't going to talk about, but the three now heard it, is that you know, we do have some things that we've been doing with regional line forces for some time. For instance, the 35th Engineer Brigade has been working with the U.S. Army South for over 20 years now for anything that involves the need of reserve component capability.
Fred, did you hear that? Okay, you have the Southern Command, ASCC commander right there, so he's taking notes on that as well.
And they've been working with them, so as you have capabilities for new beyond the horizons and et cetera, the 35th has historically been the organization that works with the rest of the states to find the right capacity. And we did something similar a few years ago, and Pat mentioned the 141st North Dakota. It was an MEB out of Illinois initially, but we just thought it was right. And we have some capacity, and we're just trying to align some of that capacity, at least giving a contact, Durloff, if you would, to the ASCC to talk to a commander that can maybe help find that capability so that when they write the RTIMs, it could become a little bit more defined. So if I can have the next slide, please. We've talked about it a couple times throughout some of the previous presentations, the state partnership program. It says 64, but as you heard earlier, just recently signed between Oregon and Vietnam a state partnership, so now it is 65. They're located in all the GCC AORs. It's a 20-year-old program, celebrated the 20th year with a major conference here in Washington back in July, where most of the state partners had their chiefs of defense or their minister of defense come in and participate. It was a great event. The keynote speaker was the chairman, and I thought it went quite well. So how did it begin? It began as a collaborative effort as the Iron Curtain fell, and the commander of EUCOM was looking at the Eastern European countries. How could he engage them so that they would understand primarily the relationship between a military and its civilian leadership? And he worked with General Conaway, our chief, of about 20 years ago, and said, can you help? And so that's why, as you look at the map, EUCOM has such a large footprint.